Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Rethinking Education podcast. I believe I think this might be season 6, David.
Good Lord.
I know. That's longer than Breaking Bad.
I'm just as dynamic a partnership.
Indeed. I think maybe I should start calling you Mr. Cameron to show my respect.
You'd be using a lot less chemicals, though. So, I think we've got to take that into account.
So let's wrap up that silly nonsense and get into catching up. How are you? What was your summer like? What's been like the start of this new term been like for you?
Great. Had a great summer. The highlight, met this guy, James Mannion, in Edinburgh. And we shared the remarkable experience of going to the Traverse Theatre and seeing a play called Lost Lear, which we were delving into before we went live. Just one of the many fantastic things that I saw around the festival and Fringe in Edinburgh. Had a wonderful holiday, and term has been off to a really great start for me. I had a series of events at the beginning of September, and I'm just always delighted, James, when I do these things and find that the same crap still works. So I had a brilliant week. I started with the Pennine Academies Trust in Yorkshire on the Monday, and that was a really good day for me. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I then worked on the Wednesday with the Aspire Multi-Academy Trust, and that was an even bigger treat because I was sharing the day with our recent guest, Jazam Pofar. So I got to swan around with her and, by osmosis, absorbed lots of her charisma and reputation. And it was lovely to see her, hear her, but they were a great, great group to work with. Lots of alternative provision within the trust, big range of staff. And then on the Friday, I actually did a full day's training. So I did the whole day. And most notably, recovered from the fact that I managed to drop my laptop in the Uber on my way to the gig.
What, and it like irreparably?
No, it was still in the cab, and I was
You left it. Oh, you lost your computer. Oh God.
and I had to attempt to recover that and find an alternative approach. So I managed to deliver the entire first hour on my phone. The guy who worked in the venue kindly got me a connector for my phone, so I did the whole thing off my phone. Managed to contact Uber, and the guy brought my laptop back to me for a mere 20 quid. But honestly, I will never need to take a laxative again the rest of my life.
Yeah. How was that? Yeah. Did you feel the adrenaline pumping as you were thinking, like, how to rapidly rethink this at the last minute?
Yeah, no, in all honesty, I felt everything pumping. Um, Heart, adrenaline, bowels, everything. It was an entirely pulsing experience for me. It required extensive therapy, and it's only now I feel I'm fully over it, really.
Well, I'm sure that you dazzled as you always do.
I think more got away with it, really.
Yeah.
And for
Wow.
you?
Yeah, I'm well, thank you. I too had a lovely summer. Yes, just on that Lost Lear thing. If anybody watching or listening to this ever sees that Lost Lear is playing near you, I believe that it's touring or that it is a touring company. Just sell a kidney to go and see that. It is just absolutely phenomenal. I don't think we should necessarily say any more about it at this stage, other than that it's just, I think this is the best thing that I've ever seen in a theatre by some margin. and I go to the theatre a lot. It was just mind-bogglingly good staging. So yes, thoroughly recommended. And so I very much enjoyed our afternoon together, and my trip to Edinburgh. I was reviewing this time for the Edinburgh for Fringe Review. It was my first time as a reviewer, which was interesting. In a number of different ways. It's a lot of work, it turns
Yeah.
out. It's like going to the theatre, but you get homework. That takes quite a lot, and it takes quite a lot of doing. And you're working with, as a performer myself, who's been reviewed both favorably and unfavorably, and sort of fairly and unfairly. Like, I really weighed the responsibility of that. I felt it quite heavily, and Fringe Review is a wonderful organization. Like, it's sort of like the most ethical reviewing outfit, I would say. Like, there's quite a lot of weirdness and sort of borderline corruption around reviewing, and PR companies writing reviews and cash for stars and all that sort of stuff. But Fringe Review is just really above board, and really lovely bunch of people. And it just feels good. Like the very first night I was there, I went and saw this play right at the spur of the moment, the last minute. It was a Greek tragedy, Euripides play, and there was about 7 people in the audience, and it just blew me away. It was so good, and I wasn't planning on reviewing it, but I sort of felt obliged to, because if we can do anything to help them shift a few more tickets, because they've gone to such extraordinary lengths to learn this, like, whatever it is, 2,000-year-old play. And it was so good. It was really just incredible. It was in one of those, those Edinburgh venues where there's just black curtains and big electric fans whirring, and there's like a drag show above, and you could just hear like ABBA and Kylie Minogue and like platform heels stomping around on the floor. And then in the opening monologue, it was like really distracting, but the performances were so gripping that you just immediately tuned that out, and it was just, yeah, it was amazing. So yeah, it was fun to see your beautiful city and country, and yeah, had a very, very relaxing summer. Lots of little mini breaks. We just stayed in the UK mainly. Oh, I went to one thing. I went to a conference, an education conference in Austria, the EARLI Conference, early with an I, and that was
Right.
really interesting, because like the area of education that I'm interested in goes by many names, right? Like learning to learn, competency-based learning, self-regulated learning. I now tend to use the language of learner effectiveness. And there's basically nobody nobody in England, at least, is doing any work on that. It's not been a part of the conversation for the last sort of 15 years, really, since the start of the Gov era. But I remain intransigent, and I'm flying the flag. But internationally, it's still like the centerpiece of many countries' education policies, and it's one of the EU's competencies, and the OECD talk about it and what have you. And so I was invited to take part in a symposium, like an international symposium, with researchers and school-based practitioners from Estonia. There was a guy from Mexico, and from Italy. And so it was really lovely just to not only just to connect with that international community of people who are interested in the same stuff that I am, but also just to like dip my toe back into academia, right? So, because when I finished my PhD, I didn't go into academia, and it's just really interesting just to taste a bit of that world again. So that was nice, and got to see a little bit of Austria. So yeah, that was good.
Excellent.
Mm.
Excellent. So, I'm jealous of your international celebrity. I think I got as far as Durham. That, you know,
I wouldn't go so far as to call it celebrity, but it was like a 15-minute talk, and like usually I get paid to do talks at conferences, and this one I had to pay for, and it's not cheap either, and that's before you paid for the flights and accommodation. So it was a bit of an investment, if you like. But it looks like we're going to get some publications off the back of it, and there are good things happening. Yeah. that was good. Had a nice day in Vienna. Mate. Have you ever come across? There's an artist called Hundertwasser or Hundertwasser.
No,
Just amazing. Like this. I wanted to go on the big wheel. You know the big wheel from like it's in The Third Man and all that, right? The big famous wheel in Vienna. Went on that, and I just had a few hours to kill, and went to just a nearby museum. And there's this artist there. In fact, this is some of his stuff. I bought some postcards, so it's sort of like super
right,
colorful. He was very into spirals. He seemed to have this sort of almost like a mystical um, attraction to spirals, and just amazing. And he was really into architecture, and he was like against straight lines and against flat floors. He was like, flat floors is just an invention of architects, and it doesn't exist in nature. And so all the floors in this place are all a little bit wavy, and you see you're almost falling over as you're looking at the art. But it was just, yeah, absolutely phenomenal. He did this one painting of the Munich Olympics in 1972, and I just couldn't tear my eyes off it. This thing was just absolutely transfixed me completely. It was just amazing. So if you're ever in Vienna, go and
right,
check out Hundertwasser. It's a very cool
right.
place.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will.
Anyway, sorry, go on.
I'll be online. I'll be online immediately after the show.
Yeah. Check him out. He's very, very interesting. He did lots of good interviews and things, and published lots of manifestos. A little bit like us. We're going to be doing that. We're going to be talking about that later today. First of all, I think it would be nice to there's been some lovely feedback. We don't do this on the podcast often, probably not often enough, but I've seen some lovely feedback from people on recent podcasts. There was one, speaking of the manifesto, actually, if you remember in our last conversation with Jazz, who you just mentioned, we talked about like what are the key ideas here that we could take out from this conversation that we might stick into a manifesto, and supervision came up, if you recall. And there's a person called Shashi not with a K and double T, who posted on LinkedIn, really enjoyed the latest edition of Rethinking Education with Dr. James Manny and David Cameron. The need for supervision in education is powerfully articulated by Dr. Jazz Amporfar. If anyone would like to know more, then please join us at the upcoming Supervision in Education conference. So looking forward to this. And so this was news to me. I did not know that this was a thing, but it is in London. Is it in London? St. Mary's University. It mentions UCL. Where's St. Mary's University?
I don't know.
Let's Google it quickly. Um, I've not heard of it. Oh, hang on. Twickenham.
Right?
Seems to be in Twickenham. I didn't know there was a university in Twickenham. St. Mary's University, Twickenham, London. It's 60 quid, so it's pretty low cost for a conference. It's 4 hours, and it's about professionals who work in education from early years to post-16, and about supporting them through supervision. So there you go.
Can I can I quickly add to that?
Mm,
I moonlight on a much lower key podcast called Taking Action, and one of the ones that I recorded recently was with three primary heads from West Lothian
mhm,
in Scotland. It's such a jolly affair. I describe it in the program notes as being like herding budgies. They interrupt one another. But one of the things that they did was they used the additional funding they've got, the pupil equity funding,
mhm.
to introduce supervision for staff in the school. And they they talk about the difference that it's made. And it had come up in an event that I did where people were saying that, they got to the end of the week and they were left with all of this stuff that kids had brought in, parents had brought in, issues in the school, issues in the community, and how they wished they had that equivalent of social work supervision. So these schools have done it. And one of them's got a counsellor in who does the equivalent of supervision. Um, and what they are seeing with that, alongside the range of other initiatives, is improved achievement, greater interest, greater commitment to the school in 3 areas of really significant social and economic deprivation.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, I really wish that it had been around when I was in the classroom. I certainly could have used
Yeah.
it. Like, you can just think back to those days. I think everybody can probably picture those days when you just like, my goodness, yeah, it would have been nice to have a place where you could go and somebody can just hold that space and just where you can be vulnerable, right? And, not just like putting on a show and pretending that you've got all the answers, and just to say, yeah, this happened and finding it really difficult. And yeah, really interesting, really interesting. So I think that we've hit on a rich scene there with our first entry into our little manifesto. There was also there was a lot of love for the let's do this. So there's some back episodes got some love recently. There was one. So we have this thing called Buy Me a Coffee. Like, people can contribute, because we do this. This
Right.
is a labor of love, isn't it? Right. And we have there's a Patreon, and there's also a thing called Buy Me a Coffee. And Rizwan very kindly bought us 3 herbal teas. I'll have to shout you your one, David, when we next meet. Saying, I listened carefully to the podcast you did with Jay McTighe, and it's given me so many ideas and hope with which to try to make learning engaging and authentically purposeful, even while working within the existing structure. Thank you again. And that's amazing, because that's one from about 3 years ago. I think I recorded that episode with Jay, and it's 4 hours, 4 hours long, that one.
Goodness.
And so that's lovely. Thank you for that, Rizwan. It's very gratefully received, your kind donation, and lovely to see that podcast still doing good work 3 years down the line.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was good. There was some love for Richard Bustin from Christian Moore Anderson, again on LinkedIn. Finally got around to listening to the Rethinking Ed podcast with Richard Bustin, and it's absolutely excellent, he said. And then the jazz one. So Kirsty Evans, there's a few things. Yeah, as well as that one from Shashi. Kirsty Evans, Dr. Kirsty Evans, said, this podcast, like the last one Jazz joined you for, was among my favorites. Always a roller coaster of emotions consuming anything with jazz in. Great work, everyone. And then some lovely comments from Jazz herself, where she said, I get interviewed a fair bit, but not like this. This was my second interview for the Rethinking Ed podcast. The first one is still the best interview I've ever done. Sorry, David.
Yeah.
But this one comes dangerously close. Someone asked me last week how I want to be remembered. My answer, as a troublemaker. Not the reckless kind, the kind of troublemaker who is fueled by curiosity, who asks the awkward questions that blast us out of fear-based, limiting answers. And she goes on, she says, we're brilliant at moaning about the system, but too often we forget we are the system. I mean this especially in education, when we're so good at moaning about the system, but not remembering that we are it. That's why this conversation with James and David means so much. We're doing like a little reverse name drop now. They are titans in education. We are titans, apparently, who don't shy away from troublemaking either. Talking with them is never easy. It's uncomfortable, stretching, energizing, and exactly what's needed. Check out their work. So that was nice.
Yeah. I think that's one of the great things about Jazz. She's so generous. I mean, I had a long conversation with her when I worked with her, and she, she's got a great sense of herself, but she's got lots of self-doubt. She is curious, she is interested. And she talked a lot about that unease she's got about kind of becoming a star, and people thinking of her as a celebrity and wanting to be recognised as that troublemaker that she spoke about. And I think that comment, I'm very grateful for what it says about us. I've never been recognised as a titan before at all.
Surely not.
I'm now hoping that maybe a career in Marvel might be my next move. I think it says an awful lot about Jazz as well. Really grateful to her for that.
Yes, she's a beautiful human being, that one. And all this talk of moaning about the system and not remembering that we are the system brings us really beautifully to the event that we're running, that we're both helping to organise, this event in Manchester at the school that's led by Ben Davis, another former podcast guest. It's at St Ambrose Barlow RC High School in Salford, and it's on Saturday the 11th of October, and it's called Everybody Thriving. I think the strapline is something like, "What can we do to improve well-being and increase a love of learning?" Because there's a lot of a sense that people are not loving the diet of learning that they're being fed in schools. What can we do to recover that? And that this idea of like, we are the system is really at the heart of this event. And so the aim of it is to have, and we've never done anything like this before, so this is new for us. So we're calling it an unconference, and it's really just about getting a bunch of people together in one big room for the whole day. And crowdsourcing ideas for like, what would a thriving educational ecosystem look like? What would it smell like? What would it sound like? What would the lay of the land look like in terms of different types of schools, different sizes of schools, the geography, the buildings, rethinking the whole thing? What would like peak well-being look like? What would a thriving system look like? And then thinking about barriers to achieving that. And then lots of the day is going to be spent with people sharing case stories, things that they are already doing within the constraints of the current system. People who are already doing tremendous work, a little bit like the three heads that you were talking about with this work around supervision. Like, there are loads of things that we can do that sometimes people just aren't really aware of. And so we're going to spend the whole day together in one big room. It's going to be a very joyous, I think, and joyful affair. It's a day for like lots of mingling and human connection. We've decided to not have name badges. So if you want to know who that person is, just go and ask them. There's going to be a human library. And so lots of sharing, and then off the back of it, depending on what what ideas we come up with during this day, we will, I hope, be able to publish a very helpful little publication off the back of it that we can spread around, with practical ideas for how to improve well-being in primary and secondary schools. So that's going to be tremendous, and you can join us in person, and you can also join us remotely. There's going to be an online version of this event, which is going to be hosted by the amazing Christina Kopman, who's based in Rio de Janeiro. So it's an international affair. You can join us via Zoom if you aren't able to come to Manchester, but it would be great to have as many people joining us as possible so that we can share all of your brilliant ideas and start to channel them in the directions that they need to go in. So yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really exciting event, and I think also I'm very grateful that you suggested I've been helping. I've mainly been helping by apologising for being unable to attend any of the meeting. That's been my significant contribution thus far. But I love the fact that this is something that's really bucking the trend. Big events like Northern Rocks that were very much central to what went on have now gone, and we had various attempts to revive Northern Rocks, none of them successful. Portobello Learning Festival in Scotland, we ran that twice, hugely successful both times, and then just couldn't get it off the ground in the wake of COVID. So this is brave, I think, to take something on at this stage, and I'm delighted that it's going to go ahead, because we need this. We need these forums. We need opportunities for collectivism. We need people to be able to come together, share ideas, but also share courage. It's hard work for people being out there trying to do things despite the system, and then trying to change the system at the same time. All of that, I think, hugely demanding. So I think this is a really great venture, and really looking forward to being involved in it. And also delighted that, it's only one. We'll talk later on about the next decade event as well, I think. Another real sign that alternative voices are starting to make themselves heard again.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And this is the first event of this nature that we've attempted, but I'm already thinking that off the back of it, we can do lots more things like this that would be online, that would operate quite quickly. And like one of the amazing things to happen this summer, which I omitted to mention earlier, was that I had a really really lovely afternoon spent in the restaurant on top of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, sitting with my good friend Ellie Costello, who's the director of Square Peg, and Ellie's son, and Audrey Tang. Have we talked about Audrey Tang before?
I think we are, but carry on.
So Audrey Tang is super interesting. So she was a Taiwanese politician until quite recently, and before that was like a what they were calling a civic hacker. So like working with very computer literate people. So one of the first things that they did was that like they had this website called GovZero. So they basically reproduced the government website, but changed the O in the word gov for a zero. And they basically took all of the information that was on the government website and just made it better. And so people were like just using this better website. And then some of the government ministers were like, we just need to make this our website because it's so much better than the one that came before. And in about 2014 or 15, there was an Occupy movement in Taiwan, just like there was all over the world at the time, as I'm sure you recall. And they occupied the Taiwanese parliament. And whereas, in Wall Street, and also there was a big tent encampment outside St. Paul's Cathedral, and it was essentially a protest, right? And it was all like, we are the 99% and the 1% and all of that stuff. But in Taiwan, they took it quite a lot further, and they made it about deliberation and about coming up with policy ideas. And Audrey had the foresight to take in a huge, big, fat cable into the Taiwanese parliament, so that they were able to live stream what was happening. And so at the time, there was a trade deal that had been arranged with China, which was massively unpopular in the country. And they said, they were like, well, let's just like renegotiate this and come up with a better way of doing this. And so they broke into different corners of the room, and some of them were working on the jobs market, and some of them were working on the publishing industry and whatever it was. So they broke out into different areas, and they had like 500,000 people watching this stuff being live streamed, and they were using this software called Pol.is, and it's software that's designed to generate consensus, right? Instead of having this like adversarial sort of like shouting down your opponent situation like we have here. So they have this software that just like finds ways for people to agree with each other, and they very quickly were able to come up with just incredible examples of policies that really worked. And they used to do this thing called a presidential hackathon. Audrey Tang was on the Rest is Politics a while ago, about a year ago, and that was where I first came across her work. And Rory Stewart asked her, like, what's the thing that you found most surprising being a politician? So after this protest, lots of those people became part of the Taiwanese government, and Audrey was one of them. And she said what's been most surprising is that like the ideas are in the room. She's like, there's loads of people in and around politics, often sort of quite low level, advisors and policy wonks and geeks and so on, who have got really good ideas for how to fix the problems that we face, but they don't have the power. They're not the people who are in the rooms of power. And so they came up with this idea of a presidential hackathon where they anonymized the process. So they would sort of say, we've got these like 10 areas of policy that we really want to innovate and do something around. So you just put a team together and, put in a proposal. And if your thing is the winning proposal, then we'll fund it and we'll make it happen. And so, for example, they did one where there was like rural problem all over the world, like rural internet connections were really weak. And so people who lived out in the sticks weren't able to access like telehealth, right, and have a remote appointment with their doctor. and they were able to solve this problem in a really short space of time using this approach. And so Audrey does this. She wrote this, or co-authored this amazing book called Plurality, which is about the interface of like the digital world and democracy. So it's like a positive vision for digital democracy, and technology, as we've seen in recent years, can be really quite destructive to democracy. So they set out a positive vision, and I'm really interested in this idea of using Pol.is to tackle some problems and to sort of generate consensus in areas of education policy where there's been sort of entrenched differences for many years around around some key areas. And so I'm really excited about this next phase of our work. It's taken a while with the Education Policy Alliance to find our feet and to figure out what it is that we can do to operate in this space of like coming up with policy ideas that can help move things forward. And I feel like we are closing in on a potential methodology for how to do lots of that stuff in a fairly short space of time, with people contributing from the comfort of their own homes. So watch this space. But yeah, that feels like an exciting development that's just in the early stages.
I think it's great. I think I I've always been a huge fan of pedagogy. I don't know if you've come across
Mm-hmm.
it, but had a stronger foothold probably in Scotland where it originated. But that idea of a community, a grassroots community coming together online, live events. And I think what I've always looked for is that alliance between the grassroots, if you like, and those who have executive power, so that we can be informed about the changes that really need to be made, and then at the same time have the capacity to make the changes. But that's what we need. You know, if you can't get that alliance, then the alternative is revolution, isn't it? In whatever field you're in. You know, if you can't get that brokerage between executive capacity and grassroots demand, then you need overthrow.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and that brings us back into that world of kind of conflict and who's right and who's wrong, and dialogue based on antipathy, which is no dialogue at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's very obvious, isn't it, as you're saying that this is this is not only an education problem. I
No,
mean, the state of politics locally, nationally, internationally is really, really worrying, isn't it? And it's very clear that inclusive, deliberative practices, what I refer to as slice politics, is the only way out of this mess. Like we need an operating system that bridges those divides and that makes people feel included and seen and heard and respected. And we don't have anything remotely resembling that at the moment, but it is starting to happen in schools, right? So like off the back of that book that I wrote earlier this year, Making Change Stick, where I talk about slice teams a lot, schools are getting in touch, and it's really exciting to see that work taking root. And I've started to publish a series of little mini podcast interviews with school leaders who've been working in this inclusive way. And it's genuinely exciting, and we're creating a model here for how we can have this inclusive, deliberative, sort of bottom up, if you like. It's not really bottom up, it's because it's not it's not anti-leadership. Like leaders are in the room, but it's just like all levels of the organization working towards solutions that everybody can feel like they have a stake in. It feels to me like that's, if we're going to get out of this very, very difficult, troublesome period of history that we're living through, this is the mechanism by which that's going to happen. And so
yeah.
we need to put roller skates on it and rocket boosters and see if we can escape. We're going to mix a few metaphors there. See if we can escape gravitational whatever pull and get into orbit and just get these ideas happening, develop case stories of businesses, hospitals, government departments, local government people who are using this methodology of like collaborative decision making in a way that actually improves people's lives, right? Like we need examples of that working. So that's the plan anyway. I wouldn't call it revolution, but it's more than just evolution, because it's a radically different. It's not just a tweak to the current system. It would be a radical alternative. So anyway, that work is continuing in the background.
Yeah, I mean, if evolution's regarded as a positive progress, then it's supported evolution.
Yeah, I think but it's quite a leap. It's what you might call it. It's like the fish walking onto land or something. Like we've not had anything really like this before, so it feels like a big one. But anyway, let's get back to the podcast. So we wanted to do this this episode without a guest, where it's just you and I sort of talking, like reflecting really on where we are. We just passed the 100 mark, the 100 episodes mark, and we want to start to do a few different things with the podcast. For example, starting with things like this, where it's just going to be you and I, just like making sense of what's going on. We could perhaps have some Q&A type questions where listeners and viewers and what have you might want to contribute and ask questions and talk about things that they want to talk about and hear about. One thing that I would really like to do is to revisit some old episodes, which, as we've already heard today, just because they were recorded 3 years ago, it doesn't mean that they're not worth listening to now. Like, they absolutely are. And I think that it would be good to sort of start at the beginning. We don't have to go through every one of them, but to start at the beginning in episode 1 with Deborah Kidd, to pull out ideas to stick into our manifesto. I really wish that I'd thought of this 6 years ago, but better late than never. So yeah, I'd like to do more of this, and more sort of like listening back to old episodes, and with you and I recording maybe a top and tail to reflect on what we think are the takeaways.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, I do think that's always a danger, isn't there? That the new podcasts come out, we promote them, and some really substantive contributions get missed. Just it's really interesting. I think music. I think increasingly is like that. You go back and you discover something you haven't listened to for a while, and you go, wow, that still sounds good. That still works. And I think there's a real case for making sure that we resurface things of worth on a regular basis.
Yes.
Even if not on them. I think that's a really important thing. I think that, I mean, obviously, one of the key things about this podcast is that we have an AD after David, and we have a BDC
Yeah.
before David came up. So yeah, and I think some of these BDC ones need to get out there again.
I agree, and it'd be good to get you up to speed, and so you can finally learn what it is that you've got yourself embroiled in here.
Totally.
Okay, that sounds good. And then the last thing that I wanted to discuss in this episode, and I don't know how long this might last. I could talk about this all day, but we probably shouldn't. Is like what I'm sort of calling loosely like the big idea, right? And so it's like, after having written and read and thought and practiced, and just been so immersed in education for 20 years. It was literally 20 years ago when I trained to be a teacher. So 20 years ago, September 2005, I was starting my PGCE. And I know that you've been involved in it for a little bit longer than that. And I feel like I've been blogging this year. I sort of started in January and doing this like every other week thing. So every other week I publish a blog about making change stick. And then every other week, I do one about rethinking education. And there's been this sort of a theme that has emerged through that process of blogging and sort of forcing myself to just generate ideas on this like regular timescale, that there's one sort of key idea that it feels like has emerged as the thing that I think is the most worthy of attention. And it was the title of my last blog, which I published during the summer, is a neat encapsulation of this idea, and that is to say that there is more to human development than learning about subjects. And then the strapline of that blog, it says, "This feels like a strange thing to have to point out, but we are where we are." And then it might help if I just I'm not going to read this whole thing. We'll put a link in the show notes. And also, by the way, we'll in the show notes, we'll include links to that Supervision conference and to the Everybody Thriving event as well. So let me just read a bit of this and just see how far we get. That there is more to human development than learning about subjects featured centrally in my last post, but having reflected on it over the last couple of weeks, I feel like this idea deserves a little more space to breathe, partly because it's such an important, true, and strangely overlooked idea, and partly to explore the implications of what this means for schools. And then in brackets it says, by the way, this post applies mainly to secondary schools, although the essential idea is applicable in primaries also. School timetables are divided into subjects. This is a strange sentence to write. It seems unnecessary to mention it because it's so widely understood and accepted. Disciplinary learning is just what schools do, almost all of the time. It's the water we swim in. In secondary schools, the notion of subject learning runs to the very heart of a teacher's identity. 20 years ago, I wasn't just becoming a teacher, I was becoming a science teacher, or you're a teacher of history or drama or whatever. And, there are at secondary, there are no non-disciplinary routes into teaching. You pick a lane, you pick a subject, and then you stay in it pretty much. And then I go on to say, it is, of course, perfectly sensible that an education system should divide the world into subjects. You can't study everything at once, of course, and dividing the world into subjects makes the task of learning about it seem so much more manageable. And, of course, within subjects, there are many subdivisions, right? Within science, we have biology, chemistry, and physics, and then we break that down into cells and solubility and space, and we have this sort of hierarchical approach to understanding the world. And of course, that's helpful. But because it's so widespread and just sort of commonly accepted, I'll go on to write in the next paragraph that there is, to point out that there is more to human development than learning about subjects seems somehow subversive. But really, it shouldn't be controversial to say this. It's simply a fundamental truth that is all too often overlooked. So there's a lot more to say about this, but I just wonder what's your initial sense upon hearing what I've just set out?
Yeah, I mean, first thing is I agree it's timely, and absolutely we've seen a real reassertion of subjects. Our conversation with Richard Buston was a really good illustration of that. The appointment of subject-based principal teachers in primary schools, which we're seeing increasingly, I think is another indication that disciplines are making their way back. And clearly, there's a place for that. But my concern is that fundamentally, we need to use subjects to promote understanding and to promote a wider understanding of the world. And I know that I do this all the time, but the legacy that we're leaving our children is dreadful. That the whole environmental issue we've touched on and talked about before, but the idea that truth has become an endangered species is something novel and frightening. And that's happening despite all of this emphasis on knowledge. we've got one rhetoric about the importance of transmitting knowledge. And on the other side of that equation, politically, you don't need any knowledge to tell lies. The truth should be underpinned by knowledge. That doesn't seem to be the case. And what we're offering, I think, a lot of the time is that very narrow, truncated view of subjects in any case. I think we often talk about the fact that we're good at teaching maths, but crap at teaching mathematicians. Maths is doing incredibly well in terms of presentation at A level, but we're losing mathematicians constantly. So actually, we're not even doing very well in subject
No.
terms. Interesting to reflect back in the conversation with Richard that his devotion to geography. But, are we seeing geographers coming through in the way that we did in the past? People who are really committed to deepening our understanding of geography, our relationship with place and so on. I mean, if we had geographers, people who really understood the impact of environment and place on the way that we live, then the idea of climate denial and the denial of the ecological crisis would be unsustainable. So there's so many questions around that. And the other last thing I'll say in this particular element of the rant is that we need people who can think. And while I think subjects support and enable thinking, if we impart them with rigidity rather than flexibility, then we lose that potential that they have to promote thinking. So yeah, a few initial reactions there, and if you don't like these, I've got more.
Well, I very much would like to hear more of that. I mean, absolutely, yes, I agree with what you're saying. Like, it's not working, is it? Like, I read a really interesting blog yesterday. I think it was James Marriott talking about the post-literate world and just how, like, nobody's reading. People just aren't reading. There was like a reading revolution that happened when the printing press came out, and it was this like the biggest. He described it as like the biggest transfer of knowledge from elites to like just everybody, and it was a beautiful thing. People were reading stuff left, right, and center, and that's just not happening. Like since the invention of the smartphone, in particular. He doesn't cite his sources, but he says that, I don't know where this comes from, but he said that the average person is staring at their phone for 7 hours a day. For Generation Z, it's 9 hours a day. 9 hours a day. So that's like 25 years of their life, not even counting sleeping, that is just spent doing that doom scrolling thing, just watching content that's designed to appeal to the sort of often the worst aspects of a human being, just like envy, materialism, jealousy, like rubbernecking, gossip, death, gore, like conflict, watching people having street fights and stuff, like just 10-second reel after 10-second reel of this stuff that's just hypnotized the planet, and it's just so grim. And of course, what are they not doing with all of that time? They're not reading, they're not engaging in discussions with people. It's really, really, really worrying. And schools have we've talked about this a bit before, haven't we, that schools' response to this is often just to ban smartphones in schools so that schools can get on with teaching. And I think that there's a case for that, but it doesn't go far enough. Like, we need to be engaging in, like, just one of the non-subject specific things that we should be doing in schools is talking to kids every week about technology use and how they're finding it, and what does good look like, and how can you use technology rather than it using you. And that's a really important thing that needs to happen alongside many other things that need to happen to help people to navigate this very, very dangerous time that we're living through, where, you know, and every day you turn on your email and it's like, oh, would you like this AI feature that will read all your emails for you and it'll draft responses, and you know, you go on Zoom and it's like, oh, do you want me to record your notes and I'll send you a little summary of your conversation. And constantly the machines are just nibbling away and just trying to bite away. And, you know, some of those tools, you know, might be very helpful. I'm sure that some of them are, but we're losing a lot in that process, and it's deeply worrying. And teaching people about geography and about music and art is an important thing. You know, we shouldn't lose that. I'm not denigrating, you know, people like Richard Bustin for saying like it's really important to teach people about geography. Absolutely it is. But if you look at a school timetable, it's just wall to wall subject learning, and there's nothing else happening in secondary schools in particular. And so like to share some examples of like valuable stuff that doesn't fit neatly into a subject shaped box. So for example, in the learning skills curriculum that I did my PhD about, we had huge amounts of time, 5 lessons a week of non-subject based learning. And one of the first thing that we did at the start of year 7 was a thing called the Who Am I project. So they had 6 lessons a week, 3 lessons a week for 6 or 7 weeks to answer this question, who am I, in as many ways as they can. And we gave them very little guidance. We gave them a 1-page project brief, and it's just like, off you go, answer that question in as many ways as you can. And so some of them, you know, made a family tree. Some of them interviewed family members. They wrote a letter to their future self, a letter to their younger self, like we heard a very powerful example of in the last episode with Jazz. One girl I remember made this 3D model of her house, and there were these little tiny sort of figurines of family members and pets and important objects in her house that had little labels on that told something about her life. And it's a wonderful thing to do. And it's, you know, I suppose you could do it within the context of English lessons. But it's not really ticking those English boxes. You know, some of them would just make a PowerPoint with photographs and images that they then wanted to talk to, and that was fine as well. You know, we built and grew an allotment, teaching kids about, you know, growing food, and then, you know, what that looks like and feels like, and what it's like to get some soil under your fingernails. And we took them down to B&Q to buy some seeds and bulbs and what have you. We built a greenhouse out of recycled plastic bottles. We did an enterprise project called the £2 Challenge, where we gave each kid £2 and they had to raise money for a school trip, which they planned, they organized, they did the letters, they did the risk assessment, they booked the coach, they did the whole thing. I could go on, but there's so much stuff that's really, really useful that just doesn't fit into subject spaces. You know, just as one final thing, this work that I've been doing with the Welsh government recently, which is these resources which are currently being rolled out across secondary schools across the whole of Wales from this month, which is super exciting. That again is really valuable, really important work that is not doesn't fit into a subject shaped container, although you could use these resources. We share examples of how you can use these resources in science and art and maths and what have you. But you know, more broadly, I think that the best model for how to deliver these resources around learner effectiveness is to have 1 lesson a week where you sort of spend 20 minutes looking back at whatever, you know, you looked at last week, and then you have some new input. It takes about 20 minutes to teach each of these. We've developed 72 strategies in these 6 areas of physical, emotional, habitual, relational, cognitive, and then navigational learning, how you're going to get from A to B. We've got all these strategies which take about 20 minutes to teach, and then the final 20 minutes is planning, you know, when, where, and how you're going to use this in the next week or so. You know, practice using it a little bit, maybe set some reminders, and you just run that cycle again and again. And you know, we're talking here about 1 lesson a week, right? We're not saying we need to cut subject learning by half, but we need to have timetabled time in the school curriculum in secondary schools, I think, in particular, where we are talking about things that are very important that are not subject learning.
I mean, it's interesting also to look back at things like, you know, the Birmingham Guarantee, for example, and lots of other people
What's
were
that?
doing that. Well, that was when Tim Brighouse was Chief Education Officer. They set up the Birmingham Guarantee, and it was a range of
All
experiences,
right.
essentially, that were entitlements for young people. So, you know, a
Mm.
theatre visit, uh, a residential experience. I can't remember the details of what they were, um, but it was that idea that schools needed to offer more. And I mean, Mick Waters has been a great champion of that idea of the the total curriculum. Whole Education is another organisation that recognises that education is about so much more, and that there's a need for us not only to offer learning, but to capture learning, because young people will learn from other experiences. We need to capture that. We need to bring that in. We need a much more holistic approach, I think, than we're seeing in many instances. Although one of the things you're very good at doing, and you've been very good at doing it today, is to keep citing examples where these things are happening. Um, and what we need is we need to get them happening because of the system and not despite the system. So I think there's lots of possibilities, different ways of timetabling. Um, you know that you've got these schools that are running the fortnightly timetable. Some interesting discussion about that last week. The idea that you would have alternative timetables for a week every so often. And it is just about that idea of openness and balance, isn't it? That um, we're not making a case that everyone should be at Summerhill and nobody should be at Michaela. Um, we're making a case for people having the opportunity to get a range of experience, a range of approaches, and to have that opportunity to work out what works for them. Uh, I love your who am I idea. You know, that idea that if we don't understand ourselves, we're not going to understand anything else. Um, I think there's a lot of power in that. Philosophy for children be another good
Yeah,
example.
that's in my list. That there's mention in that blog. Yes, exactly. A really, really good example. Making sense lessons. The thing that I wrote another blog about recently, where it's just like, let's just get together and just talk about the questions that you might have about these issues that everybody finds so confusing about, sometimes contentious issues like, gender politics and immigration and the things that fill the news bulletins, which again, don't necessarily neatly fit into subject-based boxes, and so yeah. So it feels to me like this is a resting place for a while at least. Like I feel like I just want to hammer this point home until it starts to gain some traction, because just like if you just look at LinkedIn, you look at like educational discourse online, whatever platform that might be on. Look at the books that are being written. I had a email this morning from a publisher saying new geography book has just arrived, and it's all just cognition. It's all just like cognitive stuff about memory and retrieval and feedback and success criteria and grade boundaries and data and like the knowledge rich curriculum, right? Flashcards, just it's just all cognitive, as though children are like a brain in a jar, and that's all that's happening is just like the whole of education is just a process of transferring information from the curriculum into children's long-term memories. It really feels like this is just the idea that needs to be recognized. And I would love to hear what, if you're listening to this or watching it, I would love to hear what you think of that. Like, do you agree that this is the most important point that needs to be made? Because the reason that I feel like that I want to alight here, and we'll wrap this up shortly, but the reason I want to alight here is that once you accept that, it just opens up all kinds of possibilities. Once you accept this, to my mind, an undeniable truth that there is more to human development than learning about subjects, then you start to make decisions about the timetable. You start to create space in the timetable, in the weekly rhythm of people's lives, where this other very, very important work can take place. And it's up to schools, and it's up to teachers and school leaders and what have you, home educators perhaps even, who to think about what this looks like in your context. But it needs to look like something because what we're doing is just not working. It's not enough. Subject-based learning, yes, it's super important. And no, it's absolutely not enough to ensure that somebody's going to have a well-rounded development and to prepare them for life beyond the school gates.
But that's interesting, I think, in that maybe that's your fundamental point, James, is that the purpose of education is to support human development. And I think we would argue to support human development based on a range of values around tolerance, around justice, around democracy, around all of these things. And, what we're seeking, I think, is some clarity about purpose. And for too long, I think we've been lurching towards a view of education where the purpose is transactional. Get qualifications, get on. Get qualifications, get a job, get qualifications, get into higher education. It's become very much transactional. And of course, if you accept that limited view, that very narrow view of education, then, a revision's enough. That
Yeah.
seeing things again is such a, revision's such a depressing term, isn't it? That, we didn't see it clearly enough the first time, so we need to look at it again. That there's something about the importance of depth of vision, of range of vision. And I think what we're saying is that if that's the purpose, we're not going to achieve it by ploughing one furrow, whether that's the knowledge furrow, whether it's the skills furrow, whether it's the relationships furrow. If we just keep going up and down that same furrow, we're not ploughing, we're tunneling. It's the equivalent of open cast mining, and we know how well that went.
Yeah, absolutely. It's reminding me of that. There's a cartoon to illustrate the sunk cost fallacy where there's this dog and you can see where his bone is and he's digging a tunnel that's not anywhere near his bone. And the dog's going, well, I'm this far into it. I just need to keep digging. I'll find the bone eventually. And, it's not working. And I see lots of people. There's a line in this book. Have you come across? We might have talked about this before. There's a really good book called How People Learn.
You've talked
by
about
Nick
it, I haven't read
Shackleton
it yet.
Jones. I really recommend that you get yourself a copy and have a read of it. Well, I'd love to get Nick on the podcast, but he talks at the start. I can't find the exact quote, but he basically says that there are lots and lots of very, very intelligent people who come up with all kinds of sophisticated reasons as to why things need to remain exactly the same as they are now. And I saw somebody, there's like a prominent education, author and consultant or whatever, who recently people are talking about oracy and how it's really important to, develop oracy. And we hope that this is going to feature more strongly in the curriculum and assessment review. And this person said, "Oh, I hope to goodness that nobody's going to suggest having oracy lessons, like eye roll emoji or something," as though like just the very suggestion that we should set aside some time and space to develop somebody's spoken language and communication skills is like just not even worthy of contempt. And it seems it's almost like this. I alighted on this phrase. It's like it's got a defensive tone. It's like defensively defending the indefensible. That kind of feels like what the tone is around this. Just like people who deign to suggest that we should do anything differently are just sneered at and ridiculed and prodded and poked fun at and told that they're barking up the wrong tree, and that we should just basically, like you say, just like dig this this furrow ever deeper, or just flog this dead horse, or whatever metaphor you might want to use. Like, it's not working. It's very, very clearly not working, and you can see that in terms of school behavior and exclusions. You see it in teacher retention and recruitment. You see it by looking at the news and seeing people, parroting half-baked nonsense that they've seen on the internet as though it's real. And we need to pull our socks up, don't we? And jolly well do better.
Yeah. Well, the alternative, of course, is that it is working. It's working if you're Mark Zuckerberg. It's working if you're Elon Musk. It's working if you're a proto-oligarch, regardless of whether you're coming out of Russia or you're coming out of Silicon Valley or wherever you're coming from. It's working for them. Billionaires are getting richer. Inequality is massively increasing. If the public education system collapses, that's fine. If what you're interested in is moving towards intensive use of AI, you don't need the labor, you don't need the creativity. What you need is you need a system that serves your interests. And what we've seen, Rick Perlman, the American writer, is very good in this, is the rise of the boardroom Jacobins, where we've seen that coalescence of people who control media, people who control technology, people who control wealth, and those who lead in politics. And we've seen that, and it's established itself to such an extent that a Labour government with one of the largest majorities achieved by a Labour government, in history, is now acting as if its job is to appease Farage. Now, that's a really powerful statement about how far the Overton window has been pulled to the right. So it's working for a bunch of people, and a lot of folk are being deluded into believing that somehow or other it's working for them. If you're out marching in London because you feel your very culture, your traditions, your livelihood are all under threat, and yet you're aligning yourself with the elite who have created that situation, then there is something fundamentally wrong there. And it comes back to that, old school stuff about education as a subversive activity. We should be creating people who think, who are prepared to challenge, who are prepared to think things through. And if that leads to them agreeing with the system and the status quo, so be it. But our job is to make sure that they can make the decisions to whether that's right or wrong.
Yes.
We've got a minute.
There you go.
James.
We've got our work cut out, David. But it's energizing for sure, because things need to change, and I feel like you and I and many of the people that we are speaking to have parts of the solution. But we need to redouble our efforts. I feel like this podcast, for all that we've achieved over 5 seasons, or into season 6, lots of people have been in touch, like we heard earlier, to talk about how it's changed their practice, and it's a beautiful thing to see. But I feel like we could be a little bit sharper in and a little bit clearer about what it is that we want to see more of and less of. And so, yes, I'm looking forward to seeing where this next few weeks and months takes us.
I'm certainly going to get off the fence. I'm going to start saying wellbeing.
I never thought of you as a fence sitter, David, but even more so, perhaps just like just cut the elastic between you and the fence, just roam free. say what you feel. And so we have some great episodes coming up. We've got Dave Whitaker coming on soon. We've got Rupert Wegerif, who had a lovely day with the other day, who's got a fantastic book called Rethinking Educational Theory. And if any listeners or viewers want to get up to speed with him, that book is great, but also Rupert's got a really, really good Substack. Look up Rupert Wegerif on Substack. And he writes a lot about AI and about the importance of high quality dialogue in getting the most out of AI. So he's super interesting, with many more people lined up. So lots to look forward to.
Excellent. Yeah, exciting
Indeed they
times
are.
ahead.
All right, so let's wrap up for now then, David. We will be back soon with another episode. But until then, thank you everybody for joining us.
Yeah, and thank you again for having me, James. And thanks to anyone who's still listening.
Take care.
Welcome to Rethinking Education. Education's critical friend.
How it is and how it should be, wrestling in the streets again. One's got the other by its expectations. The other is going for a submission. Hope has stoicism by the neck. Acceptance is struggling for breath. 'Cause driving has it on the ropes. What I want is being choked. My wheels being dragged through a hedge backwards. But not before it bloodied the nose of the world. Happy as it boxed the years of change. Contented, assaulted. Progress with a chain. May you find kindness under that stone. May the fall come early this year. That bridge is hoping should be finished this year. You can go